Ow. Coming for you, Steve. Phanteks Glacier G30 GPU water block and backplates are now available for the ASUS RTX 3080 and 3090 Strix GPUs. Available separately or as a bundle, the G30 water blocks unlock your RTX 30 series Strix card's full potential while keeping the temps low and the clocks high. To see the G30 GPU water blocks and the full lineup of water cooling gear from Phanteks, click the sponsored link in the description below. But that's not actually what we're going to be doing today. Nope, today we're going to actually be kicking things off by taking a look at our very first XFX 6800 XT. Yes, I know they're not available, but just imagine you're online. You just happen to go to Newegg and then boom, there's one in stock. Oh, should I get it? Wait, I don't know. I didn't see any reviews about it. We asked them not to do reviews of things you can't buy. That was a stupid thing to do. So we're gonna review it. That way you guys at least know if you see it in stock, whether or not it's worth it to get it next year. This is the XFX Mercury 319. Is there a math reference in there, Phil? 319? Is it 319 Celsius? Nick, what's the temperature of liquid mercury? Siri, what's the temperature of liquid? So we haven't reviewed an XFX product in quite a while, actually. I think it was like back when like the 500 series was a thing. So these are the cards that everyone is kind of holding out for, and not specifically this card from XFX, but these are the cards that the audience is holding out for as the saving grace of inventory, because AMD, when they launched, only launched their reference boards. And obviously, once you get these cards out onto the market, they are going to help add some more inventory to the world. But whether or not that's enough, who knows? My God, this is long. Holy cow. This is one of our RTX 3090s. And this is a big boy, by the way. Whoa. I mean, the PCB's not that big, but the cooler is. The PCB is barely slower. Slower?
Slower?
Slower length than the 3090. So anyway, there's our first comparison in terms of size. How big that is. Hold on, how big is this? Let's give a reference. Yeah, it's big.
So it's about 37 of those, right?
37 of my reference units. By the way, if you guys liked what you saw on my back, you can buy it yourself, jsusense.com. Dude, it's chunky. It's like chonky. Not chunky, chonky. There's a difference there. And I do need to be careful with this because I mean, let's face it, any GPU is hard to get your hands on right now, right? Okay, so let's do the peel. It's got a matte black front right here. It's kind of textured, not rubberized. It looks sort of rubberized, but it's not. So they got a little bit of a blow through sort of design like we saw with some of the NVIDIA cards here, where you got the overhang of the cooler, air comes through here, which is supposed to add a little bit more efficiency in these coolers, and that they don't have to make these crazy 90-degree turns to get out. This is a dual BIOS card, as we can see right here. So we're gonna have a higher power limit probably and a different fan curve. We can check the difference in the BIOS. You do have your back plate. There are thermal pads touching the heat plate, or the back plate. It looks like backside of VRM, backside of the core, and more power delivery right there. So it does obviously have functional backplate, if you will, because you don't want a backplate just to sit here that's solid like this with no cutout for the core, right? You see there's no hole right here. You don't want it to just sit there insulating the heat. You want it to at least allow that heat to transfer to this plate so it's doing something. It's not even gonna be adding any real rigidity, because one of the things that XFX has done right here that I am a huge fan of, can't really see it, I don't want to tear it down, but what I'll just tell you guys is that there is an L bracket coming up from the heatsink and the PCB, attaching it to here. So you have triangulation right here of the cooler. So although it is hollow right here, there is a piece that is making it rigid. That's what causes it to sag, believe it or not the length of the card or the weight of the card. It's the fact that if this is not connected to this, that's where you get your flex. Weird flex, but okay. One of the things that I thought was weird about the cards that we're seeing now is the exclusion of certain connectors. So just like on the reference card, we've got one HDMI, 2 display ports, and a USB-C. I said in my initial review, I wasn't sure how many people were gonna be upset about the removal of the 3rd display port because of the fact that if you're running a 3 monitor setup and you're running DisplayPort, you're now going to need to either have a DisplayPort HDMI adapter crossover cable to put your third display there, or you're going to need a USB-C to DisplayPort breakout cable as well. So you need something else. Doesn't mean you can't do it, just means you need something else. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to get this thing fired up. We'll get it on the test bench, get the driver installed. We're going to test this versus the reference card to see how it compares, because one of the things that we're really curious about is how the custom boards and the custom coolers are going to fare, because I have a feeling that these cards, in terms of core clocks, have been pushed to their absolute max at the 250 watt plus 15% that you can get if you move that slider. And the reason why they did that is because AMD is showing that their core architecture is as fast as a 3080 or up to, at a significantly more efficient way of doing it. Because remember, the 3080 card is a 320 watt total board power, where this is a 250 watt. Although we were seeing with the reference card, it was doing more like 260 to 270 with like rage mode or something enabled. But what we're also finding is that the core clock is so dynamic. I'm really curious as to what these board partners are doing to enable higher core clocks, or I should say more consistent higher core clocks, to get higher scores and higher FPS and all of that. If you want any idea of how long this is a Maximus 12 Asus motherboard. Look how far that hangs off the end. It's almost as long as the case. Oh my goodness. The nice thing about this too, versus like the 3080s, the custom 3080s and 3090s that we're seeing, and yes, you're gonna hear me reference NVIDIA a lot in an AMD video like this, because this is the dilemma people have. This is the first time in the high-end competition area, in terms of the market, that we are seeing AMD have a viable option. So that's the thing you're gonna start seeing people have to contend with in their own brains, is whether or not they want NVIDIA or AMD. So having 2 8-pin power, except not 3 8-pin power, like we're seeing so many of the really high-end custom cards for NVIDIA come out with, is kind of nice, I think. That way you don't have to worry about whether or not your power supply can handle it. Ooh, the lighting on top is tasteful. See it? Ah, look at the lighting. It's like a nice little like thin hyper white with the red XFX or RX logo in there. That's tasteful. I like it. It's not like over the edge on lighting. So as you guys can see, it's at 0 dB mode. We've got 2 larger fans and a smaller fan in the middle. This is gonna really bug Phil. He's very like, it has to be symmetrical. None of this asymmetrical stuff. He doesn't like this. So, but it's not as bad as some of the other cards we've seen.
Yeah,
it's really not. So we go into our Radeon software here. Let's see what's available to us. This is the BIOS that it was on by default. So I don't know if that's gonna give us any extra power limit. So it's automatic and default out of the box. We got some presets here like rage mode. It's okay, still 15% power limit. So far this is not seeming like it's really any different from our reference card here. In terms of temperatures though, for sure. So let's go ahead and fire up my good old trusty Heaven benchmark. We don't run our benchmarks on a cold card, because then what happens is as time goes on, the scores will drop until they've reached equilibrium with the temperature. So remember, lower temperature equals better score. And if the temperatures are low when you first start a benchmark, like we just booted the system, it's been sitting off all night, you run a benchmark, you'll get your highest score. And then from there it will go lower. So we always preheat the cards to get them into a more realistic scenario of the fact that they've been running. Yes, I know it's in an open air test bench, and most people say that's not a realistic scenario. But at least this way, the only thing limiting the card's performance in terms of temperature is the card itself, not a chassis giving inadequate airflow to it. Right off the bat, I can tell you though, we're looking pretty good here. We got 44C on our edge temp, and our junction temperature, which is the hottest on the die, is 62C.
Look at that clock speed consistency.
Yeah, look at this. Like our reference card did not stay like this, even when it was cold. It did not stay locked. Is anyone else out there surprised by the fact that the clock king belongs to AMD right now? Imagine if all graphics cards, whether it be NVIDIA or whatnot, could go to 2400 megahertz. That's insane. What's surprising here, and Phil can comment on this because Phil ran a Vega 64 for a long time. The edge temp, which is current temperature, and junction temperature, which is the hot temp, are normally like as much as like 30C apart, but look how close together those are. Like Vega 64,
oh yeah.
Yeah, you'd see those be like almost 40C apart at times. Mm-hmm. But this cooler is clearly doing an amazing job at keeping them close. So I'm gonna do automatic overclock. 2514 is where I tried to go on the reference card. That's lower. You know what though? I'll take 2474 if it's consistent because it never hit 2515 or 2514 on the other card. 70C on our edge temp. And our fans are still not even really turning. One complaint that I have, and I said this on our reference video, I hate the fact that you cannot adjust the fan temperature in a preset. I wish it would do auto overclock, but then give me a second area to control the fans separate from the presets. Because if I want to let it auto overclock and I want to just go 100% fan speed, let me do that. This is the kind of stuff that AMD needs to incorporate into their drivers. So remember the reference card, it was just like that was the core speed. It was just like, what is it doing? So are we pulling more than 250? No, 230, how? This can't be, it's like voodoo. How could it be doing this frequency at 255 watts? It was 238 for a second there. 2590, 2641. What the hell is this reading right? This can't be reading right. No. Okay, it crashed. Something happened. That's fine. Okay, I just like maxed out that slider to see what the hell. I tried to go to 2800. 2689. Oh man, I don't want this to be a bug. This isn't a driver bug, is it? It's really doing this, right? 2707! Woo! We'll just do Time Spy because Port Royal is RT, and this is, I want to see how the rasterization performance does. Oh my God. Hey Nick, remember that graphics card I just gave you? So AMD uses this phrase a lot of smooth. I don't know if it's just my mind playing with me, but it feels smoother when I look at it on here. This is a 144 hertz panel. It is turned on to 144 hertz, but it just feels smoother. And smoothness is frame pacing. Frame pacing is the most important thing of perceived smoothness. If you've got frame pacing that's all over the place, and it's jumping all around, those changes in frame pacing is what makes you feel like something is stuttery or laggy. That's why locked 30 FPS at the exact same frame pace or the exact same milliseconds for frame rendering is going to be a much better experience than a game that's jumping all around 30 FPS, where it's averaging 30 FPS, but then you're getting like 32 millisecond frame and then 12 millisecond frame and then a 90 millisecond frame. I'm not advocating 30 FPS gaming. You guys know me, I would never do that. But that's what makes smoothness a thing. Oh. You stupid son of a... Okay, so I need to pull back. We know the overclock's applying now. Whether or not the frequency being reported is accurate is one thing. So I'm gonna reduce this to like 2720, and I'm gonna go down to like 2620. So we'll keep it 100 megahertz separated right there. You guys heard what I had to say. Let's see where the numbers land, and then we'll test the game. Steve, I get it now.
The biggest.
So because it's forcing this separation of 100 megahertz, I can't only go 2700. I gotta lower the other one to 2600. Okay, so what's our score? 18,570, wait. Our previous score was a 17,675. So this card is like 1,000 points higher than the reference card. And our 3080 FE got an 18,125. We didn't overclock those cards though. This is overclocked. So we just got 181 average FPS in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 6800 XT on the 10900K, got 177 FPS. I don't think people realize on a CPU-bound title like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, well, it's fairly CPU-bound, gaining 4 FPS is significant. But that means the overclock on here is truly doing something. So to compare now, we're gonna go back to preset Rage mode. And no surprise, the exact same number we got with our 6800 XT reference model. But there's a Rage BIOS mode, so things are about to get real ragey. So I'm gonna go ahead and test this right now though, compared to the out-of-the-box settings that you just saw. So the other BIOS that we were doing our overclocking with was actually the balanced BIOS. Rage mode, or the hardware Rage BIOS, automatically sets certain parameters. It makes the clocks go higher, it makes the fans go faster, and so it's not gonna change probably where we were with our overclocks. That's probably, because we did that manually, and I'm assuming that's gonna go farther than this is gonna go. So we wanna compare this to the stock numbers that we just showed you, the 177 frames per second in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Okay, so if we go to manual mode, power tuning, you can see it's still the same 15% power limit. That doesn't... Well, what I started to say before I was so rudely interrupted by our LN2 tank is that that doesn't mean that the 100% isn't a higher starting point. But anyway, like I said, I'm leaving this out of the box as it was, and I'm not gonna manually overclock. I am going to just leave it in the hardware rage mode. And we're gonna go ahead and run Shadow of the Tomb Raider and see if we're any higher than 177 FPS. But I think it should be. Yeah, so you can see the rage mode BIOS out of the box didn't really have any change, but doesn't mean you should still try your overclocking with that BIOS. One thing I do want to point out though, is the reference model that we had did not overclock. And what I mean by that is if I applied higher clocks to it, it just went to where it was. It went to the 2300 and low 2400s. This card is clearly going farther. Now let's explain why that is versus something like NVIDIA. And I love the fact that I get to compare AMD and NVIDIA and actually point out something with the AMD cards that we've kind of lost on some of the NVIDIA stuff. The reason why this card is going farther than the reference card is the fact that NVIDIA, this time around, built a custom PCB for the Founders Edition card, where they were always based on the reference design, but they had slightly beefier like chokes and capacitors and stuff like that. But the layout was identical to the reference. However, this time around, with Founders Edition cards being a custom PCB, they're also binned. They're also binned in that they're the best performing chips, just like you've got right here. So instead of AMD binning them for the reference design, they are truly a reference design with cores as they come down the assembly line are plucked and picked, or picked and plucked on the PCBs as they go. Not like sorted by top 10% performers, top 1% performers, etc. However, when brands like XFX get their GPU dirty, ADD much? But when brands like XFX get their chips in and their allocations, they do binning so that the top performers go into the top tier models and then the little bit less performers go in the lesser tier models, so on and so forth. We haven't seen AIB cards on NVIDIA's side really clock any higher or be any different than Founders Edition cards, which is kind of disappointing in that they all just sort of land in the same spot, overclocked or not. But actually seeing an overclock apply to an AMD card like this and get us 1,000 extra points in time spy and what, 4 extra FPS in 1080p, slightly CPU bound / bottleneck title like Shadow of the Tomb Raider is exciting to see. It means that there's probably a reason to buy a higher end model from a certain manufacturer, where for the longest time, speaking of just NVIDIA cards, because there was nothing in the high end to compare like this, I always just said, get whatever card you like, because they all perform exactly the same. So that means that with the brands that we have sending us cards now, I might have to go through and actually do this spot checking like this to see exactly how they're performing versus the reference card. The reference card should usually be the worst performer, unless you're talking about just a pure minimalist card that you would find on some of the lower bin cards, which is just gonna be like, here's MSRP, basic cooler, doesn't really overclock very well, that gives you your money. But unfortunately, I don't have the price of this card as of making this video. I've reached out for the price. We'll see what it ends up being, but at least with the 6800 XT Merc or Mercury 319, you do get extra stuff for that money. And it's not just the bin GPU that can boost higher, the dual BIOS here, which has a hardware rage mode, which gives you additional limits versus the balanced mode. You get the additional lighting, which I like the fact that it's not set to RGB out of the box. You get the dual ball bearing fans. You get the higher quality PCB design, you get the higher quality VRM, the higher quality chokes and capacitors. And all of those things are gonna not only give you a better experience when it comes to overclocking if you care, or faster speeds right out of the box, it's gonna give you longer lifespan and longevity of the card. It's funny because we have a reviewer's guide and it basically is expecting hotter temperatures than we're actually getting right here. That's probably because of the fact that we are in an air-conditioned warehouse in an open chassis, in a computer case. The thermals are going to be more controlled by the chassis itself, which is why we do it this way, so it doesn't impact in the card. But it's really exciting to see this competition take place. And it's even more disappointing that it's so hard to get your hands on them, because now is when so many people might be willing to actually buy a Team Red graphics card or an AMD graphics card without the ability to go and buy it. Really kind of sucks, because we need that competition. But then again, no one can buy an NVIDIA card either, so what's it matter? Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and huge thanks to SFX. I always want to say SFX for like special effects. XFX for sending us this graphics card to take a look at. You'll probably see it again in the future. I feel like this is going to be our AIB like benchmark now. Like, who could beat the XFX?